Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So my apologies for the technical issues that we have had from the beginning. We had to change the link of the event, so hopefully we will get all the attendees coming in the next few minutes. Apologies again for the inconvenience. So welcome to the second webinar of the huge project. So today we are changing a bit the topic and we are going for maritime applications. Our speaker, Marc Lavine, will give a presentation on building an ecosystem to accelerate maritime hydrogen projects and stimulate ecosystems. So before we go ahead, as always, we will explain a bit more about the huge project. So we will share a short video giving you an overview of what huge is. So with the help of my colleagues here, Roberto Gonzalez from NYG and Magnus Davidson from ERI, the coordinator of the huge project, we will go ahead and share first the video of the video explainer of the huge project. So Roberto, you can go ahead. Okay, thank you, Roberto. So it is a pleasure for me to introduce you to our second speaker of the webinar series, Marc Lavine. Marc has been working in the area of hydrogen for a number of years now. He's been involved in a different number of projects on hydrogen. Marc is a serial entrepreneur and has founded several companies and is now focused on profit for purpose businesses. So without further delay, let me give the floor to Marc, and he will give the presentation on the maritime applications for hydrogen. So Marc, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately for the technical difficulties, Pao will be turning the pages, so I guess we'll start the presentation now, please. I really like this quote, and sort of has inspired me with hydrogen, is seeing that I really feel today with the hydrogen economy that we're really viewing a transition from one ecosystem to another and a new form of energy. Next. Well, Let me tell you a bit about myself and what I'm doing in hydrogen first. And I think what will be interesting for this presentation is that it's going to be a different approach that I think you've seen in the past. Is what Pao had asked for, and what I think is interesting is, as a serial entrepreneur, it's an approach of the presentation and how I'm viewing hydrogen from an investor, from an entrepreneur, and from a business point of view, and not so much as from a technical point of view, which is an interesting perspective to add to the project of Huge. So Hydrogen Impact Partners is a newly formed investment company. We're looking to invest in technologies, companies to really stimulate and accelerate the hydrogen economy. My background, as Pao mentioned, is a bit diverse. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started with internet businesses in 1999. I created a business generator, if you want, a company that created several internet businesses, including points.com. I highlight that because it's sort of a forefront of innovation. Saw that points were a real currency, and today, fast forward 20 years now, points.com is processing 1 billion points a day through its platform. Pretty much every time a loyalty point program moves or points moves, that's done through that. And I think that innovation was coming up with an idea and moving it right forward from idea through to an operational business is what the approach I'm taking now with hydrogen. So just to quickly say is when I started looking actually personally, a lot of businesses start that way, for a hydrogen boat personally and found, or sorry, a zero emissions boat and found nothing, is when I started to really research and see that there was a real opportunity to create businesses. Pao? The approach that we're taking, and it's a theme that you're going to see throughout the presentation, is hydrogen as a service. I think the challenge that we're seeing as an individual, as a business owner, or people wanting to do projects in hydrogen is there's very different bricks or pieces of the ecosystem or the chain that are in place. But if you're a customer wanting to do a ferry, as an example, it's very hard for you to come and put all those pieces together yourself. So as an investment company, as partners, we're looking to put together that ecosystem, all the partners, so we can provide a turnkey solution to our customers. So that doesn't just include a ferry, but everything from the starting of the production of the green hydrogen, or actually from the start of the program, through the production, the delivery, and the products itself. Oh. Just wanted to highlight, for me, it's quite interesting because I've been following hydrogen now for about 5 years. And at the beginning, you'd see a spattered amount of articles, one here, one there. And in the blogs, and I'm sure you all follow this yourselves, these are just 2 articles that I saw this morning, or I read yesterday, of really major projects that are happening in hydrogen and maritime. And instead of seeing 1 a week, now I'm seeing 2 a day. And I think it's really, for me, there's a tipping point of things are accelerating in the marketplace. Pao? And again, this is the Getting to Zero Coalition. Just wanted to do this as an introduction, and a bit of the theme of the presentation is that there are a lot of projects going on that are very interesting. But what's quite interesting is they've moved away from laboratory or sort of research and development to real demonstration products. And I think the second chart, which is quite interesting, is that this is going to be done not just with government funding, but with people that are investing in the real projects and businesses coming along to do that in partnership, which I think is key for the acceleration of maritime and ferries. Pao? So just briefly, a chart you've probably seen before. I just want to say there's a lot of things that, as an entrepreneur, we could do in hydrogen. And I wanted to then swing Pao. What we focused in is maritime projects. And I want to explain why. Is the following points that I think are quite interesting. Is electrical propulsion is superior, but batteries are not a viable solution. Batteries may be a viable solution for electric cars, scooters, or smaller things, but in the research and our point of view is anything that's much larger, specifically boats and ferries, it's not a long-term solution. I think the second point, which is quite interesting, is one problem with hydrogen is the space that it takes. That's a problem when you're dealing with small vehicles. It's not so much a problem when you're dealing with ferries, larger boats, or at the port itself. This is a really important point. I actually want to go back. I'm Canadian. That's where and born in Toronto, and actually started investing the first time in hydrogen back in 2000 when Hydrogenics went public. and thought that was the beginning of the hydrogen revolution and the economy changing. I think at that time there was a vision to have hydrogen everywhere, at every gas station, at every pump, at every place. I think that was a bit of mistake in a sense. It makes it so much easier if you're going to start something new with infrastructure, is with ferries that they come back to the port every day. That simplifies a lot of the problems and allows us to start projects now. The second point, which I think really aligns with Hugh's vision, is that there's an immediate and lasting positive, I should have put that word in, environmental impact today. And I think the last point, which is interesting, is given the amount of hydrogen used, you can reach a viable economic scale quickly with ferries that is very difficult for light vehicles or other projects. Well, so we sort of set ourselves an objective of saying, okay, could we make something economically viable at a, can we make something economically viable at a 1 ton level? What I think is interesting is to say that, sorry, something just popped up. Okay, is what is 1 ton of hydrogen? So as I was saying, that would represent about 1 ton a day of hydrogen. That would represent 1,000 forklifts, 200 Maritime taxis, 300 Exint trucks. These are the new, if you haven't seen them, Hyundai trucks that are, 20 of them are operating in a demonstration project in Switzerland. But it's only 4 small passenger vessels or 1 roll-on, roll-off passenger/car ferry. And I think that's what's interesting to note. If that we want to try and reach scale quickly with a project, it's much easier to become economically viable if we're using these kinds of quantities of hydrogen for the projects. Well, so I think this is interesting. You may have seen these before. I want to talk briefly about the 4 projects that I'm involved in closely and working with these companies. So, the 4 projects are can you back up? Is the Water Go Round. That's a passenger vessel in California. The Hinova Yacht. That's a day boat in the south of France. The SPMB course is something you probably haven't heard about, which I'll talk more about, is the opportunity to do small ferries in Corsica. And then there's the Bonifacio Santa Teresa project, which is a ferry, a passenger and car ferry. So the Water Go Round project is really interesting because for me, this is the sort of sweet spot, and I think you've seen this in various different presentations in the past. It's been around for quite some time, and the boat will be on the water in the fall. Why we really like that from a business point of view is it's quite a viable project with 20-meter vessel, about 84 passengers, 2 times 300 kilowatts in power. And what's interesting is you're using about 250 kilograms, a little more than 250 kilograms per day. That's going to give an autonomy to do the tours throughout the bay. And that boat will actually be in operations this year before December. And I think what's interesting about that boat is it's a really good size / use of hydrogen that can kickstart an ecosystem. There's lots of these sort of tourist and passenger vessels around that are operating predominantly in very environmentally sensible areas, and it really makes sense. I think what's interesting with Water Go Round is once this is proven, certified, and running by the end of the year, it really is an example project of the powertrain, the bunkering, the solutions that can be replicated in many different places. The Hinova Yacht is done with one of my partners, Invest. That'll be in the south of France. And actually is the first smaller yacht. It's actually in construction today. It was supposed to be presented at the Cannes Boat Show, but unfortunately that's been canceled. It's a 13-meter passenger vessel, and its first use will be used in the south of the Calanque de Marseille, which is for day tours and trips in a national park. The next project is SPMB Course. What's interesting here is it's in the south of Corsica. There are 12 passenger vessels, about 15 meters, and they all do the same circuit, the same trip, about an hour and a half. So the project we're working with is something that shows scale, is that by doing one passenger vessel and figuring out all the solutions from the production of the hydrogen to the vessel, it then allows us to have a very interesting scalable project because we can roll that out across all of the 12 passenger vessels. And that boat is really interesting because although it may take time, it really shows all of the partners involved from day one that you have something that is not just a demonstrator or a prototype, but something that is economically viable on a larger scale. The last project, again in Corsica, going from the same port, is a passenger ferry. Today there's two very old boats that are running there. And what's interesting about this is although it's a much larger vessel, the trip is very short. It's less than an hour, 15 nautical miles, which makes it a very achievable project to put in place. I want to take a bit of a step back and talk about the fact, and I sort of mentioned this in hydrogen as a service, it's not just about ferries. For us, it's about a complete ecosystem. And in all of the projects we're looking at, it's not just simply about saying, hey, we could put a ferry here or we could be a shipbuilder. It's about building the ecosystem from the start to finish. And that ecosystem starts with renewable energy, onto green hydrogen production, delivery and storage of the hydrogen. And then at the end, I put customer demand. And why is that in red? I think if you look at this chart, and in our experience, in all of the bricks, from renewable energy to production of hydrogen, even delivery and storage there, we're pretty much there in with respect to technical capabilities. They're much straightforward, and there's a lot of suppliers out there that can provide those solutions. The challenge is a bit of a chicken and egg today, is that there's really no customer demand for the products. There's a few cars on the road, a few trucks and ferries. This comes back to the point of 1 ton per day, is that we're at a bit of a tipping point or a blocking point until we can really demonstrate, and this is again why ferries are very interesting because of the amount of hydrogen used, we can really demonstrate that there's initial customer demand, economically viable, and a scalable customer demand. You're going to see the other pieces of the ecosystem fall in place really quickly. The second point on an ecosystem, back one thing. Second point on an ecosystem, and it's something that's the second half of the title, is that what's interesting is we're not just talking about sort of building a ferry somewhere and then running it in a port. What really interests me is the idea of involving multiple players of the whole local community, because all of these steps in the ecosystem are things, yes, that can be produced far away, but in many cases, we're looking at solutions, specifically in Corsica and other places in the south of France, where the renewable energy, the green hydrogen, the delivery, storage, and customer demand are all within a very short, maybe 100, 200 kilometer radius, which really stimulates a very powerful local economy around the hydrogen solution. So I want to talk just briefly on how to accelerate these projects, because I think that's the key, is that there's a lot of solutions in place, and the question now is how to make it go faster. So again, talking about involving all of the partners from the ecosystem day one. And I think I want to talk a bit about the case study of both California in this case and Corsica. More so in Corsica, is that for the project, sorry, can you go back? So for the project in Corsica, what we've done is involving all the project partners from day one is really important, because you have people that feel threatened in the ecosystem. So from day one, we started talking with local solar power providers as well with the project. We also talked about local transporters who are transporting fuel today that were worried about if there's a transition, does that mean that they're going to be losing their business or going to be challenged? We involved the port for the bunkering and the solution there. We involved the operators of the ships, both the first one we wanted to talk to, but also all the other operators that are going to be benefiting in the future. And then there were other pieces of service, maintenance, and local partners that we really tried to involve as many as possible in our ecosystem, companies, because what we found in advancing the project is people felt very threatened that this new hydrogen ecosystem will be something that threatens the existing business and they're going to be losing out. But when you start to explain to, as an example, someone who's transporting gasoline and diesel today, whether they're doing that from a central location to the ports or to the ships, or whether you're transporting hydrogen from our green production plant to the ships, it's the same similar business model. And in fact, possibly more interesting from them from an economic perspective. And that was very important in moving forward on the project in Corsica, the project in the south of France, less so in California because they're very much advanced on that. But it was to involve these players and partners to show them that this is a new revenue stream and a new business opportunity for them, as opposed to something that's going to be a change where they're going to have to reinvent their business or they're going to lose out. The second opportunity is what I call the low-hanging fruit from a zero emissions point of view, is although we're starting with ferries in the port, what we're going to be moving to in the future is everything that's possible to do within the port. So as an example, we've involved Plug Power in some of our projects that are our ferry projects, because as soon as that we get this up and running on the ferry, we solve all the problem of the ecosystem. There's the ability to then transform forklifts and other smaller vehicles onto the operations. We've even in Corsica, they're looking at an opportunity for shoreside power that I think is a really big opportunity. There's a link to ferries. Let me explain a bit about the shoreside power project, which couples with ferries. It's basically the same solution of providing electricity, but when the ferries come into larger ferries, come into port, they want to be connected with electricity. The grid in Corsica and the renewables don't allow for that, for the peak electricity, and very expensive to put in place. So one solution that we're looking at in conjunction with the ferries is being able to produce hydrogen and then deliver the electricity via hydrogen directly into the port through the fuel cells. Why is that interesting in a link? Is because all of a sudden now we're doubling or tripling the amount of hydrogen used. It now becomes viable to bunker, produce, and have green hydrogen at a low cost for the ferries. So although we're starting with one small boat of 15 meters, if we can involve other partners and see the long-term vision, it really gets everyone on board day one to see that there's more potential in the project, and allows us to, in a sense, subsidize some of the original costs and cost overages, which I'm sure we're going to have in some of the questions, with respect to the first ferry. And again, I think this is where it's interesting. It's not just about the ecosystem of the port itself that can expand, but we can expand way beyond the port itself. And again, I think it may come up in the questions, but why not just start with cars or trucks or smaller things? Again, this comes back to our 1 ton per day ecosystem. So ironically, in Corsica, there's actually a project that started in 2012 called MIRT. It was actually one of the first production facilities for hydrogen as a demonstrating plant. So they took solar power, produced hydrogen, and used it for demonstration for mobility, although there wasn't much that they could do with that, and also re-injected into the grid for peak power. Unfortunately, 8 years later, that project hasn't translated from a demonstration plant into real products, because all of the small things they actually have just bought from Renault to test now a small truck, but that truck will use 5 kilograms of hydrogen per every 3 or 4 days. It's just not enough to really kickstart an ecosystem. So what's interesting about ferries, and in the port of Ajaccio, which is in front of the MIRT, is now they're very interested in funding and partnering to provide the hydrogen fuel for a ferry, for a small passenger ferry, because that way they can attract all of the partners in the investment necessary to kickstart it, which can then move secondary into inland. And that will create a whole ecosystem around a very small town in southern Corsica. Commitment from governments. As an entrepreneur, most of the businesses that I've done in the past try to avoid government regulation because it slows things down and challenges an investment. I'm going to be very positive here and say that, and I've seen very great feedback, is that the governments are very engaged in this, but it's really important in this process that the decision making, especially for approvals around security, around evaluation, really move quickly and don't stall projects. In the past, one or two projects I've seen that have taken, an extra 3 months here or time extra. From an entrepreneurial point of view, if these things take a much extra time from the development stage to the actual implementation stage, it will slow down investment from entrepreneurs and from other companies to move quickly. So again, involving governments early, but really having, and this is something, a suggestion to the government bodies, is having the tools in place that they can make the decisions quickly is really important, that projects don't get stalled. And I think there's a fear with people and my partners and other people investing in this, that this can actually add a lot of time, unfortunately, to a lot of the projects. And if that's the case, it makes them less interesting. And again, the last point, hydrogen as a service. Again, I think what's really important, and maybe in some of the questions, or be open to get some feedback offline, is this, for us, we see this as something that's blocking or stalling a lot of projects, is that there's been too much need for an individual person or company who wants to do a ferry to solve all the problems on their own. If a ferry operator says, hey, I would love to have a brand new petrol boat, car, light, and so on, there's all the suppliers, everything's in place for them to do that. If they decide that they want to do a hydrogen yacht or a zero emissions yacht, and hopefully hydrogen, in that case, there's really no one to turn to for this. You can start to do research and find people who will solve each piece of the ecosystem, but there's not someone in place. And our vision to put that in place, and I encourage other people to be doing similar, is a one-stop solution for ferry companies or ports to have a combined offering. Again, this isn't one company providing the solution, but one company is the single point that brings together the best of brand people in each location and each port that will allow you to accelerate and put those in place to do that. In south of France, Corsica, and California, we're starting to put these groups together, and we're seeing that although in California the first boat was subsidized, the second boat, if we put on the water, could be economically viable. And in Corsica, from day one, the 15-meter passenger vessel will break even, and the project will make money on the subsequent boats. Again, we'd love to be having help in that, but if we put together the ecosystem intelligently, these are projects that can move quite quickly to break even. And why do I stress break-even profitability to a group? This is because, for me, it's a tipping point. I mentioned I'm in businesses with profit and purpose. Again, what's really sustainable in the economy, and especially what we're doing, is we can attract partners that see that this is economically viable in the short term. What allow that to do is it makes it sustainable, because without government incentives, we can continue to move forward. And all of a sudden, you have things that are replicable. So what, again, in the project that's not on the table, which is similar, is the Bateau Vert in the south of France. They have 25 boats, about the same size. They are being pushed by local governments to become green, but really don't have the people providing the service. And we've been discussing, and when that whole piece of a play is in, for the first boat, it takes time to get all of the elements put in place, but it's something that can really move quickly if everyone around the ecosystem sees that at boat number 2 or 3, it really becomes a viable solution. So that's a bit of a unique, I'm going to end my presentation here. We started a bit late, and that'll allow us to have more time on question and answers, because I'm sure there are a lot. And in the question and answer, I sort of maybe went quickly over the details of the vessels, which you're probably interested in. So I figured that was the time we can do more in Q&A. So just one last slide. The next one, actually, is, and I will translate that for you, which is something of Jules Verne, which is an author I really like. that says, I believe that water will one day be used as fuel, that the hydrogen and oxygen which constitute it, used singularly or simultaneously, will provide an inexhaustible source of heat and light that is equal to the intensity of coal. Water is the coal of the future. So it's taken us a bit of time since 1874, but I feel that if we work together, we can execute on Jules Verne's vision.
Okay, thank you, Marc. Excellent presentation. Thank you for joining in this webinar. So I will now hand to Magnus, who will be in charge of the Q&A session. So Magnus, floor is yours.
Perfect. Many thanks, folks, especially for putting up with us with all these technical issues. I'm acutely aware that there's been no Q&A function throughout the presentation. We have set up a Slido, so I think, bear with me, sli.eo for the website with the hashtag HugeProjectEU for questions. So feel free to head over there to input your questions. I'm sure that Marc hopefully would also be quite happy to answer any questions via email. We can, oh, perfect, thank you. We can collate those questions and send them to Marc. So if you're to email info@huge-project.eu, which you can find on our website, we can collate all those questions and answers and then send them out to the mailing list. We don't actually have any questions in at the minute, so I'll fire off with one of my own to begin with. And Marc, I was really interested that you kind of alluded towards the end there that in these areas where you perhaps have communities wishing to hygienize, if that's the correct term, the marine activities, that one organization can really act as almost an anchor organization to pull together the operators, the generators, whoever might be interested in the hydrogen activities. Here in Scotland, I would say that EMEC has acted as that organisation in Orkney to kind of pull together the generators, the ferry providers. Not everywhere has a marine energy test centre, so kind of rolling out elsewhere in the world, is there any kind of organisation that is best suited to be this kind of anchor, or is there no kind of common theme to that?
It's an excellent question, and it's why we've taken that approach, because no one's really doing that today. Give us an opportunity. We saw that, I started actually, been involved with the GZM project now for 2 years, and I started to talk to other ferry partners about that and saying, hey, this is great. We could, sell you the technology. We could build you a boat. We could do these kind of things, and very quickly there are a lot of questions came up. Well, what do I do about this, this, and this? Where does the hydrogen come from? Is it sustainable? Say, well, Air Liquide can provide it to you, and then this person can do this to you. And all of a sudden, in front of the people we're talking to, the ferry operators are like, thank you very much. No, thank you. And I think that's when, we realized that that's a solution that we need to be providing, because, it's expensive, a little more expensive, but in the long run, I believe it's doable. The ferry operators totally understand that if they do not take the initiative to go green, they risk losing their rights to operate, and they're very motivated to do it. But what they will not do today is they will not get up and put all those pieces, the time and effort, especially in the environment that we're facing today and the next 2 years, they won't do that. So which body can do that? I think it has to be two things. One is it has to not also be a commercial entity. Because I think, again, back to, and maybe this is my entrepreneurial bias, but for this to be sustainable, people need to see that they're going to make money in that role. And it's a business role. So that could be either a new startup, a company like ourselves doing that, or maybe a joint venture between hubs that are doing research and have yourself, academics and so on, and a local company that does something similar that can take on this approach for hydrogen. I truly believe for things to scale and be sustainable, people need to see that this is going to be profitable and they can make more money doing it. So otherwise, the boat builders, the operators, until they're forced not to, will continue along their normal path. So I think there's an opportunity to create companies like ourselves with a similar approach locally. And again, we're not, we're trying to grow our vision. Again, what's interesting about our approach is because we use local partners, we could actually come to a new port that's far away from France or in California and install ourselves there. Again, for me, there's an opportunity for focus and not try and disperse ourselves everywhere. I think it makes more sense to do 5 boats in one port than 5 ports with 1 boat. Maybe from the vision of having hydrogen go everywhere, from a demonstration point of view, that's better. But at the end of the day, these projects may have a tough time going from 1 to 3. And then they rest a demonstration project. I think that's bad in the end run for the hydrogen economy, because it gives fuel, if you want, to the naysayers and negativity. Say, oh, well, I saw a hydrogen boat running in this port and then nothing ever happened, and the hydrogen boat broke down, and no one, there's not a second one. Why? They seem to view it as it's not viable, but I think it's for other reasons. So I think, again, with hydrogen as a service, it has to be done in places where you're going to be able to scale first. And that's important, a scale that becomes interesting and economically viable. Otherwise, it's challenging just to do a one-off project to attract the right players in the long term.
Excellent.
So I also answered long to hope that we have some more questions.
Well, we've got plenty of questions rolling in, but I think your last point about scalability will come as welcome, or it'll be welcomed by some of our colleagues on the call who are looking towards these kind of projects.
I put a bit of a parenthesis because we didn't talk from a business. As you may have all followed Nikolai as a company with its public offering, raising 750 million, a market cap, I think still, even though it's fall down, a 15 billion for someone that has not produced one hydrogen vehicle. Now, again, I'm not going to say that I believe in the valuation, but why are real sustainable investors investing in that project? Because they see a vision, a scalable vision of a hydrogen highway that's possible. There's no IP, there's no tech. There's no products being prototyped or developed. They've jumped right to a long-term vision, and I think it's way overvalued. There's probably more story today than substance, but with 700 million, it makes it easier to put some substance in place. But I think that's an extreme example of people attracting investors, partners, and people to a project because they see a very, very large vision. Now, we don't have to go to the whole hydrogen highway and that vision, but I think you need to communicate a larger vision to attract people to these kind of projects. And they've done that very, very well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that long answer. We've managed to get a whole bunch of questions come in here during that. So bear with me, and I'm not being impolite. I have a second screen up on my left-hand side.
Understood.
So there's actually some really interesting questions coming in, and I will kind of work just from the top down. So we've got one here from David Hibbert asking, have you approached any marine regulators as regards certification of the vessel hydrogen equipment? Which I think is a fantastic question, because I know here in Scotland we're kind of having to deal with some of these questions around certification of these new technologies.
Okay, again, in talking to our partners, as Hydrogen Impact Partners, my role in Hydrogen as a Service, again, we have all of the players in place for each of these things. So in the regulations, the company that's building the powertrain for south of France, they've approached many times its Energy Observer, which you've seen the Energy Observer yacht that's going around. They're building the powertrain, and they're very much in communications with setting rules and regulations and so on. We're dealing with Calvera trucks in Spain to put together a really interesting hydrogen direct filling solution. So the truck will be able to fill our yacht in the south of France, and they're very much in contact with the various different ports and regulations. Again, and in California, the boat builders themselves and GGZM are actually going through certification in the fall with the Coast Guard, and that boat will be Coast Guard approved. So again, with the ecosystem model, we're really relying on two things. One is the people who are building the solutions, so they can do that to talk to regulators, but also trying to leverage off of existing regulation. In our truck and so on that we're building, you realize we're transporting hydrogen, but gas has been transported for a long time. And the challenge with hydrogen isn't so much about finding the rules, is explaining and extending the existing rules to hydrogen. What we're finding is that it's not there is regulation against what we're doing, there's just no regulation. So that's the problem, is being able to explain, hey, we can use these rules or these regulations for what we're doing, it's the same thing, as opposed to someone saying, no, you can't do that because there is no rule.
Excellent answer. I'm just even realizing that we've got a function to kind of boost questions to the top. So I'm going to take the questions that have been boosted. And we've got a really good one here. There's no name against it, but I'll read it out. So, what's your perspective on the long-term potential for use of hydrogen and or ammonia as a fuel for large deep-sea container ships?
Again, to me, the challenge is going to be the storage of the hydrogen, the bunkering.
Is that where ammonia comes in then?
And again, getting out of my realm here, so I'll probably be corrected by 5 or 7 PhDs in what I'm going to say now. But I think that ammonium, the liquid inorganics, and so on. I think the challenge for large vessels will be two things. One is a economic solution, whether that's liquid or so on, to store it. And I've seen a couple of liquid hydrogen bunkering solutions that are out there, the boats and so on. I think as soon as we have companies that bring that technology to market, that can effectively and cost-effectively store it in a similar size of space, then we can move to that. I think, though, for me, the larger vessels, there are so many issues of cost and distance and risk that I think we'll get there. But I think that for me, there are a lot of local ferries, a lot of things to be doing inland that makes a lot of sense. I come back to shoreside power for an example. The 14 largest cruise ships in Europe produce the equivalent SO particle SOx emissions as every single car on the road in Europe. So if we could simply eliminate in the ports, yes, we're polluting when we're offshore, yes. But if we could simply eliminate them turning their motors of every single cruise ship that comes to every single port within Europe and Northern Europe, the amount of pollution reduction and so on would be enormous. And again, to save the planet, we need to go farther, but in large shipping, that's great. I think there's a lot of things we can do that actually impact our local environment, our air quality, and in the Mediterranean locally, that I think we should attack first, and makes it easier projects.
Excellent. These are just the kind of facts and figures I think we need to be better at articulating ourselves. I've got a good one here again, no name against it, but what would you say is the biggest perceived risk from investors considering maritime hydrogen projects?
Okay, excellent question. Today, a couple of things. Investors rarely they love their KPIs. And a very simple thing, this much hydrogen, this much project, and so on. Today, it is impossible to point to existing business models that are working. So the biggest challenge today is you're selling more of a story, of a potential, definitely backed up by data and facts and a lot of information, but it's not simply to say this company operates with X% ratio and so on that we have in the business today. So it makes very difficult for professional investors, funds, and where money is to flow into this sector, because there is no way of truly analyzing the projects themselves. So back to when you're doing startups in the internet 20 years ago or things of that nature, you're building more on a vision, a project, and an opportunity, similar to Nikolai, as opposed to actual hardcore analysis on businesses. And I think what will really help is for investors if they can see that analysis in the risk. So it's not one piece of risk. I think there is a second perception, which I still am battling with, is hydrogen blows up, the Hindenburg. And we're not going to go into all the reasons why that doesn't apply to shipping today and to what we're doing today, because everyone on the call knows that's not true. But that comes up in many, many conversations still. And you have to explain simply why that's not the case. The biggest risk is that it's not being done. People don't want to be a first mover advantage.
Excellent answer.
Sorry, I'll add the second biggest risk is time. Is even with the boat in California, it took a year extra than planned because of problems and so on. So again, time is money from an investor point of view. The ROI is not the same if it takes 3 years as 1 year. So people are very, very cautious about investing because they're very afraid that the first boat will take 5 years and not 1 year. And then the second, so why? The biggest question when you have investors is not why invest. That's a hard question to get people over. It's why invest now. So a lot of people are on the sidelines waiting. I'd rather be doing this 2 or 3 years from now when other people have, either made money or lost money proving the path.
Here in Scotland, we're no strangers to ferries taking longer than they should to be built, but luckily nothing to do with hydrogen. But it does lead me nicely on to the next question about hybrid systems. And I'm a big proponent of both batteries and hydrogen. And we've got a question here from John asking, do you have any experience of hybrid solutions with batteries and hydrogen?
So let me be clear, everything we're building has batteries. So there is no hydrogen direct to the motors. So, in the propulsion system, you have a battery solution in there. The question is, what is the ratio of batteries to hydrogen? So in a sense, everything's a hybrid solution. Is it simply a battery that cleans the power and smooth things? Or for instance, for the Hanova yacht, people like to go fast for brief periods of time. We're not going to put in fuel cells that allow us to hit the peak power. So there's a peak in that. And I think for each use case, what's really interesting is to model out, and I don't think anyone's an interesting project to have some kind of algorithms and so on to really optimize between the size of the batteries and the hydrogen itself. I think also the question in a hybrid is if you start to get larger batteries, the question is how are we going to recharge the batteries? So if you're recharging it from the hydrogen, it's sort of not as interesting. If you now need to recharge at the dock both the batteries and the hydrogen itself, you're having two charging systems and solutions. So that comes into play to optimize. But again, there will always be some form of batteries in these boats. My feeling is to reduce them to the minimum possible for it makes sense. Again, that also comes to a point of speed. I think one of the challenges with boats today, smaller boats, is people want to go fast, or they still want to go fast. When you're trying, it's amazing the difference in power required from 13 knots to 20 knots, or from that matter, even from 25 to 28 knots in a boat, given the resistance. So again, if we can target things that have a much lower speed, batteries become a lot less important in the solution.
Excellent. As the owner of a boat that is particularly slow, I'm interested in these new solutions to go that little bit faster.
Yeah. Well, hydrogen's both speed, but it's more so range for me in what we're doing. Is really the important thing. The batteries will never be able to give you that kind of range.
Yeah, excellent. There's a couple of other questions which I'm looking at the time, and I will propose that we kind of wrap up now. And
I just want to make a suggestion. Since we started late and had some technical difficulties, I don't know if it works for everyone, but I have extra time if we want to go another 10 minutes for Q&A. I'm not sure, Pao, if that works on everyone's end, but we can extend for another 10-15 minutes if you'd like, given the technical challenges at the beginning.
Yeah. Perfect. I'm quite happy to do that, and I won't worry if I see the attendees start to drop off, because I know that we're all busy with plenty of meetings and such like, but I'll carry on with a couple of the other ones. The first of which, and I'm sure this will be a question that will be relevant to many on the call. It's from Nick asking, Mark, are you looking for technology integrators to join consortia and projects?
Yes. That'll be my shortest answer.
Perfect. We'll make your, if it's okay with you, we'll make your contact details available.
I think I would really like to see hydrogen as a service is a vision. It's not something that's patentable, although we do have trademarked the brand. It's not something that we want to be exclusive on. I think that approach is something that I'd love to be able to work with various different integrators, operators in the largest team possible. We see this on two levels. We see this on a level of teams that could be part of hydrogen as a service globally. And then we bring in the right partners locally, which makes sense. And even impossible to work with institutions or other people that they could replicate the similar model and share that, because there's more work available out there. We don't need to be competitive with a similar hydrogen as a service solution provider that would be doing this in the north. We can't be everywhere. So again, working with the integrators that can work with us locally, bring challenges, or for that matter, us working together to create a similar pole in a different port would make a lot of sense.
Thank you for that excellent answer. Just acutely aware of the funders of our project, looking at the Northern Periphery and Arctic programme, we're particularly interested in how we can use hydrogen solutions in remote and rural Northern European areas. I would be particularly interested if you have any lessons for those of us in the huge project here in Scotland and Ireland, and potentially getting a bit further afield. What lessons you have for us, perhaps a bit further north into these colder climates? Is there any particular lesson, or is it the same kind of stuff?
No, I do have I think the key for local things, there's another project which I didn't put on the table, which we're looking at, is there's a very small island off of Corsica called Cavolo. When I mean small, it's probably a few kilometers long. It happened to be a very chic island with a hotel and a port and things of that nature. There's a cable that links the electricity from the land to the island, so they're set. But a vision which we wanted to test is to say, could we become the first autonomous island for everything? Today, they're actually really interesting because although there are a few roads, the cars are golf carts. People, it's mostly summer there, but people traditionally go around all on electricity. So the idea would be to do that. I think two learnings that we love to be able to do is today, there's so much prep work and unknowns that the fixed costs of the project become really expensive. So to do something like that, it's not economical because when you start bringing people in, the time to do the research, the planning, and so on, we're not going to make back in the project. So again, that was sort of why I threw out there 1 ton a day, which is at the same time a nice big number, but a very small number when we actually look at use or whatever to get to. If we can have proof that we can make these ecosystems in larger, more viable parts, economically viable at a very small scale, then that can be replicated for very small places in the north. Because using 1 ton a day isn't that much energy that all of a sudden you have something that's locally viable from an econ. The second thing is what I find frustrating is in every single project I'm looking at, we're not using any of the heat provided from the fuel cells. The shoreside power is an example. On the boats, we're not using any of the heat whatsoever. I'm not an expert on that, but I think that that could be some way of using the heat. One project I really saw that I liked was fish farms using hydrogen because they were using the oxygen. And I think that, the oxygen which we're not using, the heat we're not using, if there's ways of using that, it makes a project even more interesting.
Yeah, excellent. We've been in discussion here with the aquaculture industry around all of these issues, using oxygen rather than a byproduct, but as a co-product, same with heat.
Exactly.
The synergies there are just fantastic.
And to add to that, if we can get to an economically viable of 1 kilogram, I'm just saying that as an example, 1 ton a day or whatever the lowest level possible is, you then add in these byproducts as co-products, then that actually lowers the minimum necessary need, or for that matter, increases the viability and profitability of the project.
Excellent. leads me on to a question here. One aspect that we've kind of discovered through the course of the project is if you're trying to replace kind of diesel or petrol generators in remote rural areas, and I'm thinking more of an efficient boat context here, even if you get hydrogen down to cost parity, there's a reluctance to use this new technology because people aren't experienced with it. If you're on a fishing boat and the engine breaks down in the middle of the Atlantic, you've been working with these diesel engines for decades. You know how to fix them. If this is a hydrogen generator fuel cell, there's perhaps that less ingrained institutional knowledge. Is there any kind of recommendations you could make there that to make people like fishermen more comfortable with using these new technologies, or is that just purely down to training?
Okay, a couple of things on that. We stayed away from fishing vessels for that reason, is that when we're dealing with a ferry that goes between Saint-Tropez and Saint-Maxime, the trip is 15 minutes. It's in the bay. And if anything ever happened, dramatically, we're not so far away. So it'll convince them that we're not going to convince them that it's more reliable than a fisherman, but the problem, if it breaks down, is lots less of an issue than being stranded way offshore and so on. I think the only way to address that problem today is I do believe that in certain applications, having a diesel generator on board that can charge the batteries, that can get, maybe it's slow, but that can get you back home as a security is something that's important and interesting. So I don't think that the solution is to convince them that trust us. I'm not sure I want to be the person that they're trusting given today. So the two suggestions to recap are places where that's not an issue because you're not far away from a port or from security, or for that matter, if you are, I really think you need to go, maybe that's a triple hybrid, is with a diesel generator as a security so that that's not an issue for them.
Excellent. I'm conscious of the time and we'll maybe round up with this one last question, and it goes back to kind of what you were talking about in your presentation and subsequent answers about first mover advantage. But related to all this would be, how about lead time for delivery of boats, how running on fuel cells? Can this limit implementation in certain places?
Well, again, I'm not really, the lead time on all of this is very long, especially if you look at an ecosystem. So the challenge is to get all of these pieces, in place at the same time, because if you want to actually go with green hydrogen production locally, the lead time on expanding that plant and putting that in place will be very similar to a boat. I think what's interesting about what we're doing is we're not going into new solutions, we're going into replacement. So we're not saying someone's decided, oh, we need a new boat and we're getting a new business model and we're working tomorrow. I think that would be very difficult because we won't get the pieces in place. But as long as we're replacing an existing vessel, the lead times are less of an issue than having the right project and the right pieces in place. Because if it takes 2 years to do, well, it takes 2 years to do. That's built into the project, the timing's there and so on. For me, it's the end result that's important. So, and that we're moving towards a solution that's viable, as opposed to saying, oh, well, we need to put a boat in the water tomorrow. Those projects will never work.
Excellent. I'm looking at the time, and just before I hand over to Paul to finish up, I would just like to say thank you for answering those questions so very well, Marc, especially after all the technical issues that we've had. And many thanks to all the people who have asked questions, and please do get in touch if you have other questions that you would like either Marc or ourselves to answer, whether not that's on maritime activities or the project itself. But with that, I'll hand back to Paul, who can hopefully round up this for us. Many thanks.
Hey, thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Marc, again for the participation in the webinar and for sharing your experiences in the different hydrogen projects. So with that, as Magnus said, we can close up the session. We will make available the recording through our website. So you are happy to go through the presentation again. And if you have any further questions, just send us an email and we'll be happy to answer. So Marc.
Well, thank you for inviting me and giving me a chance to talk. And it's really interesting what you're doing with a huge project. So glad to participate.
Okay, very good. So please keep in touch. We'll be organizing the the third webinar series of the huge project in the next couple of weeks. So keep in touch on our social media channels and make sure that you can get the updates on the news of the project. So thank you all, and
Great.
have a good day.
Bye.